Hello! So today we're going to be going over how to play forecast. If you're a beginner to TFT or if you're newer and you're looking for a general game plan on how to play forecast, this is going to be your guide. I'm going to go over the different forecasts, basically a strategy for most of the game, and then we'll go through some example forecast boards that you can try out for yourself once you have a general idea. It's a little bit difficult, especially if you're starting out in the game at TFT, to figure out how to play around forecasts because you need to level, you need to manage money, you need to buy the units, and you have to make the board. So it's, this guide is to kind of bridge that, give you a little bit of a game plan that you can use throughout your own games when you're playing. Who I am as a person, I have this channel, Fenrir Gaming. This is my gaming channel where I post daily VOD reviews. So once per week, I will do a guide similar to this one. Last week, I talked about Ornn artifacts, for example. But generally, I'm going to be taking a comp that I had just played, and I'm going to go over it with a nice red marker and say, hey, this is the good parts of this comp, this is the bad parts of this comp, these are the items you put on, etc. So if you want to learn TFT, I think the best way is to pretty much watch somebody else doing it, and mimicry is the best way to learn really early on in a lot of things like gaming in particular. So that's what my channel is, but of course we're gonna have these abridged kind of guides that will try and sum up a lot of the findings along the way, or a lot of the stuff that's there. Right now I'm a master's level player, by the way, like top 1% NA. I don't know if that means anything to you, but that's who you're getting this guide from. Obviously, if you're a challenger level player, you probably don't need a how to play forecast guide, but if you're like challenger, master, grandmaster, and you're coming to my channel, it's not the channel for you. It's more geared towards like beginner players learning, or like trying to get to master type of beat. Also, if you like my content, make sure to subscribe. Our sub goal is 1,000 subs, and then we'll have another RP giveaway, so make sure to like and subscribe if you want to support my channel. Anyways, so when do you consider playing forecast? Forecasts require really good econ. You need a lot of gold to play them. So if you start the game off with a lot of gold, it's a good opportunity for you to play forecast. You either need a strong opener, or you need to make sure that you can secure items for broken comps. Certain units really come alive with certain items, which we'll talk about later. So if you don't have the items for the forecast that you want to play, you probably can play around the forecast. And then you also have to basically like long-term kind of think about it. You have to always want to be able to go level 8 on 4-2. That's like just a general guideline for like a stage, which I'll talk about when we get there. And then the other options, these are like kind of like not really relevant in the current patch, but they're relevant in some of the other patches. It's more so like, are you comfortable with being flexible? A lot of times when you're rolling on level 8, you just have to be happy with whatever you hit. And sometimes you have to make difficult decisions and pivot around different units. So the more units that you know how to play around, if you have a good understanding of all the forecasts, not just one particular forecast, then you will have less of a chance of just being like, wah, I missed my unit on level 8 and now I'm 8th and I lost the game because of it. It's like there's often options when you're rolling for higher cost units, as opposed to like playing reroll where you're locked in on one particular unit. You also have a decent understanding of managing resources. I think the units are cool and fun. But don't worry too much about that. This is going to be a very general guide. If you're thinking about TFT and you're thinking about success in TFT, the one thing that I always try and say, this is like the mentality you should have going into every single game, is you always need 2 out of these 3 things. And when I say you need 2 out of these 3 things, I mean throughout the game. Relative to the rest of the lobby, you need to have money, so good econ. You have to have a strong board, good board value, or you have to have HP. Now, if you have all 3 of these, you're high rolling. Typically, you need to prioritize having 2 out of 3 of these. So if you don't have a strong board, then you need to prioritize money and HP. If you have a strong board, then you can preserve HP a lot of the times, but that will cost you money, vice versa. They all work hand in hand. They're all resources that you can use, right? Money and HP are resources that affect your board value. So if you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of HP, then your board value sure as hell better be good, or else you're going to run into a spot where you're probably going to be losing the game and going bot 4. So always keep these 3 traits in mind. Now, let's go over the forecast game plans. So this is the crux of the thing. It's going to be a little bit boring at first. We're going to try and show some other parts here and there. And I'm going to interject with one of my videos. So I'm probably just going to take this most recent forecast that I played, which was this Callista Fairy board. I'm going to go over it in tandem with the guide so that we have a little bit of like, hey, this is what I did in this part and this is what I did in the next part, etc. So stage 2, up until Krugs. Depending on what type of board you're playing, sometimes you slam items, but often you're trying to pick a strong augment and slam items to preserve HP. Remember what I was talking about with success in TFT? You need to have HP, board value, or money. So a lot of times in stage 2, you want to preserve HP so you have enough HP to make it to level 8, because you're not going to roll really aggressively early because you're not playing a reroll. You're going to save your gold to to roll at a higher level. So you want to have a lot of HP early a lot of the time. Now, that's not always the case, because if you slam items and you pick strong augments and you don't win streak, then you'll be really poor. So a lot of times you either have to make the decision. This is the big part. This is the really big part. You have to make the decision on whether or not you're going to play your strongest board or your weakest board. If you think that you can 5-streak, then you are going to play your strongest board. If you do not think that you can 5-streak, then you're going to play your weakest board. That's basically how it's going to work out. Obviously, that's like, you know, there's in-betweens, of course, that you can look towards. But you really, really want to 5-streak. I'm just going to put streak here. You really want to streak, right? You either want to lose streak or win streak, because that will help you get a lot of gold. Early game econ on stage 2, the main thing you should always prioritize is econ on this stage, especially if you're playing a 4-cost. The reason that you need so much econ is because it's kind of like exponential. The faster you make certain intervals, like if you get to 10 gold, then 20 gold, then 30 gold, you're getting extra gold on top of that, right? For every 10 gold that you save in TFT, you then get more gold. You get +1 of interest. That's just the mechanic of the game. So the earlier you can establish a bank of 50 gold, the more gold you'll be earning throughout the game, and then it has like an exponential effect where you're going to have a bunch of extra gold by the time you make it to level 8, and then you'll have enough gold to not only use it to level up to level 8, but also to roll on level 8 and have enough gold to hit the units on level 8. As a rule of thumb, ideally you want to be 40 gold at Krugs. If you're not 40 gold at Krugs, that is pretty bad. And you're probably gonna have to think about like improving your spot in some way, shape, or form, or hope that you high roll later. If you're not 40 gold at Strugs, you want to at least be win streaking. Sometimes if you're win streaking, you upgraded units and you upgraded certain units on your board, so then you lose a little bit of gold because you're investing in your board. If you're win streaking, then you're high HP and you have a good board value. You'll be fine because the win streak goal will help compensate for that, in addition to your board being a little bit more expensive, which if you have to pivot, you can sell that board. It's kind of like, you know, gold invested, so it makes sense as long as you're win streaking. If you look at this game in particular, so this game we'll talk about a bit later, but this game I don't have a very strong board from what I can see. So if you look at my early game board, I hit Fairy Crest here. This was just a 7 Fairy that I was trying out. I'm not saying 7 Fairy is a really strong comp to play. I think 5 Fairy is much better. You usually never really need to play 7 Fairy. It kind of does nothing. But as you can see, I'm looking around. A lot of other people's boards are very expensive. So I'm probably just going to sit here. And as you can see, I immediately sell everything. I sell everything. I play a super weak board. And I prioritize making 10 gold, because 10 gold will make 20 gold, will make 30 gold. As soon as you hit 30 gold, then you have like a really self-sustaining bank where you'll get a lot of money, and you'll easily be able to keep up with the rest of the lobby in terms of gold. Right? This is a really important part. Some people don't do this very often. You don't always want to try and strive for the strongest board. If you look around, you see that there's a lot of boards that are stronger than you. If you know that you're playing around a 4-cost, a lot of time it helps to lose the first couple of rounds. Something that I'll point out as well, right around here for Carousel. So this game didn't go too well because I actually won around here. I kind of misjudged my position, but a lot of times you'll lose all the rounds before Carousel because then you get first pick as an item. There's certain comps that you really need certain items for. For example, in this comp, I'm trying to play Callista because I'm playing Fairy. Callista really wants a Guinsu, so you need to have a bow. Right, so there's a prioritization that I need to find a bow. So a lot of times if you're playing a 4-cost board and it needs a particular unit, either Varus or Callista are very locked to certain items that really bring them out, and you're locked to certain units as well, especially me that I'm playing around Fairy Crown, then you might want to lose streak these couple stages at bare minimum just to guarantee that your items are good. Because sometimes if you play super tempo and you're really high HP, then sometimes your items don't work out, and then you have to be very, very flexible. You have to try and find, okay, what unit can I play where my items work out? So it's a little bit more challenging. If you're hard forcing into one certain line, then a lot of times it's better to lose streak these first couple of rounds. So if we go up until Krugs, I don't think I show my Krugs because this is a VOD review, so I was showing like the comp and all of that stuff. I'll just skip ahead so we're ready for the rest of the day. Here we go. Okay, so that's basically how your stage 2 usually goes. You're either win streaking or lose streaking. Often you're lose streaking, and then you're taking the items that are the most important for your comp. On stage 3. So stage 3 is where you'll be playing against the Wolves, right? So it's the Wolves stage. on stage 3, no matter what your spot is, you pretty much always want to slam items. It's very rare that you don't slam items, and you always want to pick whatever augment is strongest for your particular comp. This is the exact moment where you finalize your decision. If you're playing AP or AD flex, it's not something that exists in the current patch very well, which is a big gripe of mine of why I don't like the current set, but that is a separate issue. If there becomes a certain point in the meta where there is AP and AD flex, you have to decide if you are playing towards AP or AD. What that means is basically if you're playing 4 cost, are you making AP items, so like Morello, Rabadons, Archangels, or you're making AD items like Bloodthirster. Well, Bloodthirster's melee, but like Deathblade, Last Whisper, right? You have to decide which side of the board you're gonna primary play towards, right? And if you're not playing AP or AD and you're hard forcing towards one particular unit, then you have to make sure that you understand which unit you are playing towards so you can slam your items. Slamming your items is important because especially if you lose stage 2, like especially if you lose on stage 2, you want to make sure that you win a couple rounds on stage 3, just because it will preserve your HP. You don't want to be too low on your HP because then you won't have enough time to hit your board and you might just die instantly. Like even if you try and roll on level 8, you need enough time to like decrease the variance in what you hit. So you want to stabilize whether you win or lose. You're preserving health and you're still maximizing your econ. And the goal at the end of it is to be 50 plus gold at Krugs. You level when possible, and you don't break interest unless you have a good reason to. So if you're win streaking, you can break interest. If you're worried about your HP, you can break interest. If there's a unit that you really need to upgrade that you think is really important for your comp, then you can break interest. If those aren't good, those are good reasons. If you don't have a reason like that, then you should definitely not be breaking interest. And you want to be level 7, 50 gold at Wolves. Sorry, not Krugs, typo. At Wolves, you want to be level 750. So we go back to the example here. I'm just going to skip through it. This is going to greatly hurt the runtime of this video, but I'm doing it for you guys. Remember that. This was a very high roll game, by the way. So as you can see, I'm breaking econ. Of course, I'm breaking econ here because I found a Callista and a Rakan already. We'll talk about that later, but that's like a separate issue. So this was a very high roll game, obviously. A lot of times you won't have hit the units that you want to hit, but either way, in this game I prioritized my econ really well. I was actually very strong, so I actually 5-streaked on stage 3 after stabilizing. So on stage 2 I pretty much lost all the rounds. Then best case scenario, you get your 5 streaks, so you get a bunch of gold. You get gold for streaking in the game of TFT, so usually you want to make sure that you either hit 5 loss or 5 wins. I think it's 6 loss actually, or 6 wins nowadays, but whatever. But as you can see, level 7 and above 50 gold. If you're not level 7 50 gold on Wolves here, you're in a pretty bad spot, and you have to kind of think about what you're doing and how you're going to cap out your board. But that's how my stage 2 kind of went. I high rolled a little bit. I took Final Ascension here because Final Ascension is pretty good with Callista, and I already knew that I was committed Callista because the way that my items worked out is that I prioritized making the first Guinsoo by taking it on Carousel, right? We're loose streaking and taking bow on Carousel. I hit double Guinsoo, so I'm definitely just locked in on Callista, and I have Fairy Crown, so I was locked in on Callista anyways. It just worked out that this game was a little bit high roll. Sometimes your items aren't perfect, and then you have to make a last minute pivot, especially around Wolves, but typically you're making your decision and slamming most of your items or your primary items as early as possible. Then stage 4. So stage 4 is the Raptor stage. On stage 4, 4-1 or 4-2 is where you're going to roll down, right? 4-1 or 4-2, you want to be level 8 with at least 30 plus gold. I would say you want 50 gold, right? I said 30 plus here. It really depends on what type of comp you are. If you're playing a flex comp, a lot of times less gold is a little bit better because you can like you can play whatever you hit and you can try and make it work out. Something like there's some comps that's okay. Typically you want to be 50 gold at level 8 on 4-2. 4-2 is typically when you level. By the way, you usually level on 4-2 because if you know when you buy XP, it's in groups of 4, right? You spend 4, like, you know, when you have this and then you have the reroll, right? The rerolls are 2 gold and then the XP is 4 gold. So typically you want to level at certain intervals where it aligns perfectly. It doesn't matter that much in the other stages because in the other stages, being the perfect interval, the XP spills over, right? But when you're leveling to do your main roll down for your 4 cost, usually you want to do it on 4-2. The only time you do it on 4-1 is if you're contested and you're very scared, or you're very rich. But typically, you'll always want to roll on 4-2. Now, 4-2 works out really well because it's just universal unless you have some sort of EXP giving mechanic in the game. Like unless you bought a charm that gave you EXP or you have an augment that gives you EXP. Your XP is going to be divisible by 4 perfectly on 4-2 so that you level and there's no spillover. And that extra spillover you can then use as additional gold to roll instead of having it spill over. It's a small optimization, but it's also something that most people will follow as a rule. So this aligns with how everybody else spikes their board. And in TFT, you either want to be ahead of everybody else, but typically you want to be at the same time as everybody else, because when you're rolling for your board, they're rolling for their board. They'll buy units, you'll buy units. It'll be easier to hit your units because they'll hit their units. It'll thin out the pool. You want to be spiking at the same time as everybody else. So the intervals are very, very important to align yourself with what other people are doing. If you decide, hey, I'll just level on stage 5 to level 8 and do my roll down, you're probably dead because everybody else is going to spike their board on stage 4. That's why you kind of have to adhere to some of these rules, even if they're like very, very minor in some game plans. Like I said before, 4-2, you want to be 50 gold. Then you roll down your gold and you buy all 4 costs. This is only if you're playing flex. But even if you're not playing flex, it's just to thin out the pool, right? If you see a bunch of Terex, for example, you can buy them even if you're not going to play them, because buying them will make it a little bit easier on your roll down to maybe hit Callista. It's a little bit of like a small optimization, but you're basically just going to keep buying 4 costs. You don't upgrade them, because if you upgrade them, they don't sell for as much as you bought, but if you buy only 1 copy of them, they do sell for as much as you bought. And then after you play your strongest board, you sell everything that's not on your board to make sure that you make econ. And then what you're doing is you're rebuilding your econ. If you're losing the game, you roll. If you have unit pairs, you roll. This is the big one. A lot of people overroll. You should really only roll if you have a good reason to roll. So if you hit all your units and you're stable, you don't have to roll that much. Let's go back to my video, and we'll go through like the roll down for this particular video. Obviously, this isn't the best 4 cost example because it is a game where I high rolled, but it is one of the more recent VODs, so it's a little bit more relevant in terms of the current meta and what the current meta is. So this is neutrals, right? We get an item here. I get a support item. It's just like drops of TFT. As you can see, I'm level 7. I don't level on 4-1 here. I don't know if I'm contested on Callista this game, but I have a lot of gold. I'll just roll on 4-2. It's totally fine. So I pre-level, right? I pump a little bit of XP just to make sure that I'm ready to level. And then, right in a second here, I'll pick my augment. Little Buddies is really good. This was VOD review, so I was explaining that Little Buddies is really good for this spot. And I'm rolling around 50 gold on level 8. And as you can see, I'm paired on Rakan. I'm rolling for my complete board because I want to get multi-striker in for the Callista. So I'm trying to figure out a board. I buy Tom Kench. He's not the best unit to play, but it is a unit. As you can see, I make a little bit of a board, right, with this Tom Kench. Just as like a mid-stabilization point. And then I put in Bastion, right? This is what I mean by playing flexibly. When you're rolling on your level 8, you want to make sure you don't lose too many rounds. So you buy the expensive units and you try and build something that has a little bit of synergies just so that it works out. In this game, I actually don't fit in multi-striker for Callista for a while. So I play around this fairy Diana, which is actually very strong because Diana just like goes to the backline and absolutely does God's work, killing the backline. And Callista Rakan is very, very stable, and I already have a Rakan 2 with a trench coat, so I'm pretty stable. And most of my stage 4, you'll see that I actually don't roll that much, right? I'm rebuilding my econ. I'm occasionally buying charms just to make sure that I'm really strong for some of the fights, but I'm not Callista paired, right? I only have 1 copy of Callista. Now I'm Callista paired, so you might see me roll this turn in particular. There's no need for me to roll when I have just 1 Callista because it's really far away to hit the 2 Callistas. I might as well just rebuild my econ for as many rounds as possible because I have a lot of HP. If I didn't have a lot of HP and I was in dire straits, you know, I'm losing the game, then yes, roll to 0. Like, you know, try and find your units. But at least for this game, I'm fairly stable. My board isn't optimal. Obviously, I don't have multi-striker in. I don't have preserver in. These are very important traits with this particular comp. But I just built a board. We sit by. until we lose rounds and until we're really threatened. Because it's just a matter of rebuilding our econ as much as possible until we get to Raptors. And then after Raptors, we'll talk about it in a second, but it's going to be the next stage. So stage 5. So stage 5, I don't think I updated this to talk about charms, but I will. Stage 5 is the dragon round. Basically what you're trying to do is early stage 5, you're trying to get all the upgrades that you want. If you're playing 4-cost boards, you're upgrading all the 4-costs. And then once you upgrade everybody, you then decide if you can go 9. Very rarely do you just decide to go 9. Go 9 is a pretty bad idea. On stage 5, the thing that you should always be thinking about is charms. Now, I live a very, like, how do I phrase it? Like, I try to play the game with, like, the least amount of, like, losing to random bullshit as possible. I don't know the best way to phrase it or to explain it. But basically what I will do is, like, let's say I have a spot that I can either go first or I can go 8th. I will take the option that will give me a guaranteed 3rd. I will never, like, play towards these high placements a lot of the time, because I will instead use my gold really, like, aggressively to make sure that I secure my top 4, so I don't accidentally just like, oh great, I just lost to some bullshit and now I'm 8th because I was greeding too much, right? I'd play the least greedy that I can. If you're going 9, it's typically very greedy. It's hard to buy charms as well as have enough money to go 9. Going 9 was something that you used to always do in TFT, but now because of the charm mechanic on stage 5, you typically are rolling and buying charms. Charms can greatly affect the outcome of a fight, so you really want to buy as many charms as possible, especially on stage 5. Now, I go a step further, and I usually buy charms on stage 4. Right? I start buying charms a lot on stage 4, because charms can sway the fight, and you don't want to lose a fight because of a charm diff, quote-unquote charm diff, and then you lose the game on the spot because you basically lose too much HP before your board actually gets to its proper spike. So that's why you should never really go 9 unless you're like really in a good spot for it, because you're going to want to use that gold to roll for charms, and the charms will help you win every single fight and can secure a lot of placements. So always consider charms on stage 5 especially. Now obviously stage 4, there's a lot of thinking that you have to do on whether or not you buy charms on stage 4. That is like a case by case basis, as well as like whether or not you're in a good spot. If you are in dire straits, you're buying charms every round. Like, you got to salvage the game. If you're not in dire straits and you have a lot of HP, you can maybe greed, try and see if you can go 9 stage 5 with enough money to also pay for charms. On stage 5, this is the main part where you're making sure you're securing your placements as well. You only greed if you think you can win the lobby. If you look around and there's some guy and he has 10 portal, you're not winning the fucking lobby, right? The guy with 10 portals is winning the lobby. So make sure that you just preserve HP, play for second, right? Play for second, play for third. Make sure that you don't just randomly die. Don't greed too much, because you don't want to rotate into a 10 portal guy, get 10 0'd, and just lose 30 HP and die instantly, right? That can happen very often. You also want to roll really hard if you think you're going to go bot 4. And then at every point, you want to try and be 2 lives. What 2 lives mean is, like, what I'm trying to say is you want to be like approximately 20 HP. When I say 2 lives, it means like when you lose a round, you obviously lose HP on your tactician. When I say 2 lives, it means you want to have the ability to lose 2 rounds, right? Whenever you're 1 life, it's very scary because there's fight RNG sometimes. Sometimes people high roll and there's some bullshit, maybe a charm diff. You don't know what's going to happen. It's very risky. So it becomes very scary for you to know what to do, especially if it's not late enough that you know exactly who you're fighting and who to position against, right? There's lots of ways that your board can just easily get wiped. So you want to be 2 lives to give you like that extra leeway that if something goes wrong, you're not completely dead. So you always want to try and stay around 2 lives to make sure that you're okay. So, you know, don't think to yourself, oh, I'm 20 HP, I can greed here, because if I still have 2 lives, right, I'm 20 HP, I can lose 1 round and I'll still be alive. It's like, no, you should always think, like, you know, be proactive. And also, the main thing that I try not to say it that much, but you really should, it's a game, have fun, right? That's like the big takeaway for your 4-cost game plan. So if we go back to this video, if we go on our stage 5, we'll see that I have to roll for Callista. I found the Callista. I think I just found the Callista. Yeah, I found the Callista very early. So as you can see here, I'm not rolling that much because I'm greeding to play for a first. This is a game where I can play for a first. I have everybody upgraded and I'm 70 gold. I can still buy some charms, but I'm going to try and go level 9 to fit in some crazy shit. That's like the idea behind this game. Obviously, if I wasn't 70 gold and I didn't have Callista 2, guess what? I would roll to 0 to find my Callista 2 to make sure my board's okay. But right now, my board's very strong. I'm still playing this Tom Kench. Sorry about the pens, just because this is from the YouTube VOD review already. Look, I still have Tom Kench. I still have Diana, right? Like, this isn't even my optimal board, right? I don't have multi-striker in or preserver for these units, right? The thing is just that I was super stable, right? The main thing with 4 cost is, like, even if it's like the most broken thing ever and cookie cutter, you're rolling and you're playing until you're stable. When you're stable, it means that you're, like, even if you lose a round, you're not losing by a lot and you're probably fine. And this game goes on for a while because, you know, I make it to level 9. I eventually pivot my board to playing Camille, right? Look, I have Camille and this guy in, and I have preservers in. My board's way better. Multi-striker, preserver, Bastion, Chrono, the fucking quadrifecta of this Callista comp that's broken. And I think I win this game, I'm pretty sure. Like, I just, because this was a spot that I could have played for a first. So I played for first here, right? And I won this game. So this is an example of a 4 cost board. Now we're actually going to go over, whoopsie, where are we? This is just a general idea with items that I want to say. So when you're making items, you always want to slam items early, so I was talking about before, and you can't flex everything. So if you're saying, I'm going to flex, you still have to make a decision a lot of times of if you're AP or AD, right? You can't just say, like, I'm not going to slam any items ever. It's like you always have to slam items on stage 3 especially to preserve HP, and that's what's really, really, really important. So you have to make choices in order to do all of this, and where you're using your components and how you're using them, which we'll talk about a little bit after, but I'm just going to go through the actual 4 cost boards now. So these are some 4 cost boards. We're just going to go through it very briefly. I'm going to go through each one. I'm going to explain them. They're not really ordered that well, but I'm just going to say, like, roughly when you should play them and what the criteria are for each of them. So, first comp, Callista. So this is usually like a default, right? This is your default. You play it when you have bow, or if you know that you can secure a bow, and it's really, really stable. Right, the reason this comp is basically the most broken comp in the game right now, in my opinion. You can argue that's another one, which we'll talk about in a second. But with this comp, you're basically always playing 5 fairy. There's many different augments that work really, really well with it, like Avenge the Fallen, combat bandages, even anything that gives you some sort of defensive stats. And it's basically like this Rakan is unkillable, and Callista basically ramps up her Gwynsu's until she does a shit ton of damage. Until you have Camille, you can play Jax, but basically you always want to have Preserver in for the Rakan. Chrono, which helps heal your whole board because it's mostly like a stall comp. And then you have Multi-Striker and Bastion because Multi-Striker is important for Callista to do damage. But this is typically what your board always looks like. You want to ideally have double Gwynsu on Callista. You could make a Last Whisper on Callista sometimes, or another item that's like a bow related item that gives her attack speed, but typically that's very situational. A lot of times you're greeting to make double Gwynsu. If you can't make double Gwynsu, obviously don't just wait without an item. Make an item on her, it's fine, it will be okay with 1 Gwynsu. And then Rakan, a lot of times you want Warmogs and Gargoyles, but these can also change in terms of your tank items. And the reason this comp is so broken is because it's very, very stable on 1 stars, right? A Callista 1 and a Rakan 1 is probably the most stable 4 cost unit pair in the game. So a lot of times you can afford to lose a bunch of HP on stage 2 and stage 3 to secure a lot of gold, because as soon as you hit Callista 1, Rakan 1, your stage 4 is going to be very, very stable, and then you'll be able to convert that into a top 4 very easily. So this should be the default comp. If you don't have an opener, a lot of times it's very degenerate. You literally just sell your whole board, make a bunch of gold, and just play towards Callista Rakan. When you're trying to cap out this board, all you have to do is you just play extra preservers. You can also play Arcana in some cases. If you don't find a Morgana for level 9, then you can play pretty much any Arcana unit and pair the Hecarim, and the Hecarim will give you the extra juice. Typically you're making Even Shroud as well, and you can put on Hecarim. Sometimes you put on Rakan, but it's pretty reliable just to play this board like that. In terms of other Callista boards, this one I just wanted to point out is not relevant in the meta right now. I'm going to put here in big letters, don't play. But this was one that people used to play a lot. This was basically like Preserver, Callista, where you would play around like Fairy with the Callista. and then you would just put in a bunch of synergies and play preservers. This is a different Callista board. Pretty much if you're playing Callista, you always play the other board that I just showed you with 5 fairy. It's brain dead. It's always what you do. You never really do anything besides that. But I just wanted to show this just because this is going to be a general guide, and obviously things change from patch to patch. Maybe next patch this will be the comp that you play. Who knows? This is the other comp that you play. So this is the default 2, right? So this is the other default comp. This is 6 Blaster Varus. So with this comp, typically what you're doing is you're just playing around Varus with Arcana. You either pair the Hecarim or the Tahm Kench, but a lot of times your Tahm Kench is going to be your main tank, and then you're going to try and play 6 Blaster. You usually only play this if you have a Blaster +1, but basically what you're doing, you're stacking Blaster with Arcana. Varus, now it might look really weird, but it's actually the correct decision. You want to put double IE on Varus to guarantee the crit chance. If you have over crit chance, it says right here, if the holder's abilities can already critically strike, then you gain 10% critical strike damage instead. So putting double IE is actually really, really good on him. If you get to 100% crit, he'll do more damage anyways. And with the blasters, the crit makes it really, really strong because you want a bunch of AD and you want a bunch of crit chance because you already have damage amp. So if you're trying to do as much damage as possible, this board relies on Varus one-shotting the opponents. This board is significantly less stable than Callista. It's less stable, but caps higher, right? So this board is a little bit riskier to play. I expected this board to be like the main go-to board that people would often play this current patch because Callista got nerfed. It turns out that Callista is still playable this patch. So Callista is the main default comp that you usually play if you don't have an opener. Like if you can't play a reroll, you don't hit some kind of broken augment that enables something. Usually you're playing Callista. You're not playing Callista, you're playing Varus. Varus, you want to guarantee IE, right? Callista, you want to guarantee Guinsoo, like I said before. Varus, you want to guarantee IE. So you want at least 1 IE on Varus. Of course, if you don't have double IE this, there's lots of other options. For example, instead of red buff, you can play a Shojin. You basically want 2 damage items and 1 item that helps them cast faster. So either attack speed or Shojin. So this or this is fine. If you don't have a double IE, then you'll put a Last Whisper, which is also fine. You just want to make a glove item or a sword item, but you really want to have 1 IE. If you don't have at least 1 IE on Varus, you're gonna have problems. And the idea is that this comp caps higher because Varus 2 will basically kill anything. It has a really good matchup into Callista as well. It just one-shots everybody, especially if you're 6 Blaster. It's also locked again at Blaster +1. If you don't have Blaster +1, you basically just drop to 4 Blaster. You could play 6 Blaster without a spat because there are 6 Blasters in the game. But if you're at this point, your front line's going to be too shit. So you got to make sure that you balance your front line, your back line, you just play 4 Blaster. Varus 1 sucks. Varus 2 is important. So this comp requires a lot of gold. You need to guarantee a Varus 2 and you really don't want to be contested. Usually if there's contested people in the lobby or people contesting Varus, only one of them will top 4. It's very rare that 2 Varus players top 4 unless they both high roll really, really hard. Because Varus 2 is way more stable than Varus 1. It's not like Callista. You have to hit Varus 2. This is another variation of the board, by the way. This Varus comp has a lot of variations, but they all still rely on Varus being like your main carry. So unless you're like really, really uncontested, which is unlikely in the current patch, you can't do that much with it. This is the 4 Arcana variation. So with this variation, basically, you just drop down to 2 Blaster, and you're trying to fit in as many traits as possible, and then you Arcana select Tahm Kench. Before it was like a 50-50. You kind of decided if you went for Hecarim that gave attack damage, or if you went for Tahm Kench to give your board a little bit more survivability. If you're playing 6 Blaster, you're typically taking attack damage because you just want to try and one-shot everybody. If you're playing less than 6 Blaster, it's a toss-up of which one you think you need based on the matchup that you're fighting. But in this board, what you're doing, you're trying to stack as many traits as possible, so Tahm Kench gives your board as much HP as possible. So what this does, it makes your whole board really, 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 really strong, and really, really hard to kill. So your Varus gets to cast multiple times. So instead of one-shotting, you're trying to like 2 or 3 shot the whole board. It's not as reliable in my opinion, but if you find an early Xerath, it could work out really nicely. This was an old variation that's not as relevant anymore because the other 2 Varuses are a little bit stronger. But this is the same idea as the previous one, except instead of playing Arcana, you play 6 Shapeshifter. And the idea is that these Shapeshifters are going to be so hard to chew through that eventually you will be able to get through them with the Varus after many casts. But like I said, this is something that's been lost a little bit to time. The last really strong comp in the current patch is this comp. Now, this comp, I think I put items on the other one, which is kind of, I'll put items on this one too. But this is 6 warrior, so you need a spatula, right? This one, I'm going to put in big letters. You need gold. You need gold to play this one. This board is very expensive. It's not like the Callista board where it's a bunch of shit units and you're just hoping and you just like hit Callista and Rakan and that's it. This is a board where you need to get many upgrades. Because you're playing around warriors, these units are going to be in the forefront of the battle. They are going to be in the battle lines taking damage. It's not like a backline carry. They are frontline carries. So because they are frontline carries, they have to be upgraded a lot of the times, because if they're not upgraded, they will not gain the amount of gold. Now this is they will not, if they're not upgraded, they will not survive the damage that they are taking. This requires a lot of gold. Obviously I just put Nyla 3 or Akali 3. You could roll for them. And Katarina 3, but that's very high roll. A lot of times you're playing around the 4 cost variation where you're just upgrading Gwen and Fiora. And this one is the highest cap you typically play when you have a warrior emblem as your opener. Gwen really likes blue buff. I think when I checked her stats a while ago, it was like Gunblade, and then some other AP item like Crown Guard, for example, is really good on her. Akali, typically you want to make her so that she can one-shot units because she dashes away. So a lot of times you don't really put that much sustain on her. You'll put something like Hodge, IE, like double crit item, plus a where is it? Edge of Night. Fiora's pretty tanky and she dashes around, so a lot of times you make Bloodthirster Sterix is like your best item combo. And then often you will put your last item could be like anything but like tanky or more damage depending. If you have 6 warrior, you already have a lot of damage, so often you'll just put a Titans on her. And then Katarina, it's often going to be Hodge, this, and the Fairy Crown. With this variation you can fit in 3 Fairy if you find Milio. Milio can help itemize all your units as well, which is really important. And then Nyla, I think it's like IE. You typically want IE on Nyla, so it's something like Sterix, this, and then IE, like Infinity Edge. But of course your items, you can't really plan out your items perfectly. I would definitely just prioritize making AP items as well as AD items. This is a board that is very flexible. It just requires a lot of gold. The reason this board is so flexible is because it allows you to play towards different units if you get different items. For example, if you get a lot of AP items, you can play Gwen and Katarina. If you get a lot of AD items, you can play Fiora, Nyla, Akali. And if you get like a mixture of them, then often you're itemizing Fiora and Gwen, and these are like your main primary carries. With this board, there's many different variations as well. Typically, if you don't have a warrior +1, you're playing something that looks like this. It's the same board, except you're dropping down to 4 warrior and you're adding in an extra preserver. Same type of idea. If you get a lot of AP items, you can play around Gwen and Katarina. If you get a lot of AD items, you can play around Akali and Fiora. Other variations of this include a Karma Gwen board. All of these warrior boards suffer from the same problem, is that they require so much fucking gold. All the units, you're playing so many 4 costs, and because they're melee units, they need to be upgraded. You're not very stable with Fiora 1, Gwen 1, because they sometimes just fucking die. Like, they literally just jump in the backline, and they're just dead to Varus. So, it's very hard to play these comps, but they are very strong, if you can hit everything. So these ones, whatever I said in the guide about gold, think that you need more gold to hit these boards. This board's pretty flexible though. If you play 2 warrior, then a lot of times you can play around preservers or even basically any other melee unit you can just kind of shove in. Because with your preserver line, the way preserver works, it recovers HP passively. You want to put any high quality melee unit to make use of that, right? Anybody that can actually make use of survivability is good. So stuff like Briar and Nasus that are shapeshifters also make use of it. So for example, if you're playing the Briar variation, it would look something like this. And then if you have Briar 2, you itemize the Briar instead of the Fiora. If you have Fiora 2, you itemize Fiora. And then Gwen can take your AP items. Or Karma can take your AP items, whichever one you upgrade. So it's very flexible, right? Because if you upgrade Karma, you itemize Karma. If you upgrade Gwen, you itemize Gwen. If you upgrade Briar, you itemize Briar. If you upgrade Fiora, you get it. Whoever you upgrade, whoever's 2-starred gets the items, right? That's the picking favorites. And there's a lot of flex options here because Karma is good with blue buff, Gwen is good with blue buff. So basically, whatever items you would put on Gwen, you can often put on Karma. And whatever items you would put on Fiora, you can often put on Briar or even Nasus. So it actually works out really well. Excuse me, my thing paused. Oops, this is just the I should show that actually. I'll show it in a second. I'll show it right now actually. Give me a second. So if you're in need of looking at other comps, by the way, that aren't covered in this video, I was gonna say it at the end of the video, but I'll say it now because I kind of like flashbanged you with it. This is TFT Academy. I don't use it that much anymore. I find that sometimes like I don't agree with some of the things that they put on the website, but that's just me and the style that I play. Because sometimes I'm like, I don't think this comp is as good as they're making it out to be, or I don't think this comp is as bad as they're making it out to be, and then I look at the stats and I'm like, I think I'm right. But if you're starting out and you need like a general resource that you can look at, you can look at this one. There's also TFT Handbook by Robin Songs, and it tells you, similar to how I'm structuring this video, it'll tell you like the comp, it'll show you items, and it will say like, hey, this is how you kind of play it, these are some augments that are good for it, and you can look at some of the comps if you're unsure what to play. Especially in the middle of a game, you can open up in a separate tab and take a peek at it. So that's a resource that's available for you pretty easily. Back to this. Now we're going to talk about less common boards. So these boards are the weaker boards of the current patch, but they might become relevant a lot later. They're still very strong. It's just that a lot of times you need a certain condition to hit them. So this is 6 Chrono Karma. 6 Chrono Karma is very, very strong, but you need a Chrono emblem, which you are typically going to put on a Morgana or a Rakan. You just put on somebody. But in this variation, you are typically just going to try and hit Karma 2, and then stabilize around 6 Chrono, because 6 Chrono is very strong once you find Camille. If you don't have Camille, then a lot of times you can flex a lot of these units, right? Rakan, Morgana, and Camille. You basically have 3 empty spots that you can put anybody else, because your board is going to be very easy to hit these units on your roll down, especially if you hold on to a Jax from early game. So until you have Camille, then you just like play some variation of these units, or you can play other stuff, right? You can easily fit in the same line as before with the Fiora Gwen. As warriors with the Karma. You can also fit in other preservers, or you can fit in like other melee units, other backline units like Rise. There's many different flexible options here, but typically your highest cap is going to be playing around this Karma, Cassiopeia for Encounter, the synergized with Morgana for Witchcraft, and then Camille as your extra carry once you make it to a high enough level. 6 Chrono is very strong. It gives a lot of buffs, and it gives a lot of extra AP and healing. So a lot of times you can really scam a lot of fights, especially if you have good items on Karma. Karma, whenever you itemize Karma, by the way, I didn't talk about it the other slide, because I'm going to talk about this slide. You typically want blue buff. If you don't have blue buff, it's fine, but you always want anti-heal on her. She has the ability to hit the back line, so the burning and wounding that she gives, if you don't have red buff, Morello is essential. You always want to put anti-heal on Karma. Often your last item might also be Shiv, just because you want to shred the backline so that she does more damage, because Karma does this thing where she hits multiple units and she can scam the backline a lot. I have a positioning guide and example thing as well on my channel, which you can also look at. Another strong board is 8 Portal. So 8 Portal, you play with a Portal +1. Typically you're going to play an extra, either a Vanguard or a Bastion. Here I just put in Diana, but this spot's pretty flexible just to put one frontline unit. And a lot of times you're upgrading to make a Rise 2, and then you're trying to play 8 Portal. Jace or Ezreal, whichever one you think is more important, you can play, but typically you're going to play Ezreal. And then you're going to try and level to play Mage with Nami. Your itemization order is always Rise and Nora, but if you have a Nami 2 and you have only a Nora 1, then you could put the extra items on the Nami. Rise, similar to Karma, you typically like to put a anti-heal on Rise, which is pretty important. Rise, a lot of times you'll see like Guinsoo Archangels because of the way Portal works with the shielding. You could stack up the Guinsoo and the Archangels really high so that Rise kind of deletes the whole board. I'm not a big fan of this build. A lot of times I'll just build like bow items that give them a bunch of attack speed anyways. So I'll do something like Red Buff, because Red Buff gives you a bunch of attack speed, so it's like a Guinsoo in really short-term fights, or like other bow items I typically like on Rise. But Archangels is often pretty good on him, so you should always consider that. This is another one that requires a spat. This is when you're playing around Olaf carry. Now, Olaf is kind of weird to play around if you're just playing around Hunters. I didn't really put a Hunter board on this slide because there's not one that's super relevant. So just make sure to stay tuned to the meta if Hunters get huge buffs. Hunters are really hard to play around, but it's really strong to play around Olaf with 7 Frost. 7 Frost Olaf works out really nicely because you basically just synergize it with Varus. If you don't have Varus, you can often play around Smolder instead. Because as long as you have a blaster and a shapeshifter, you're pretty alright. So I'm just putting in the general one. You'll put the Frost Emblem on Varus because then it'll just do a bunch more damage. You get synergies with the Hui for Blaster, and then Twitch and Olaf have built-in synergy of both Frost and Hunter, so you can just play 2 Hunter. Olaf, a lot of times because he's diving around, you put Edge of Night on Olaf. You don't even have to build Omnivamp on Olaf, but Bloodthirster is really good. I really like stuff like Giant Slayer, and sometimes I'll play no Omnivamp on him, and I'll just make like pure damage, like something like a Deathblade. I know it sounds really whack, but Olaf has built-in healing, right? He gains 15% Omnivamp during his active trait, so as long as you give him some AP, which when you're playing 7 Frost, he gets a bunch of AP, right? He's going to gain like 50 AP, and then if you give him like a Giant Slayer as well, he has a good amount of Omnivamp already built into his toolkit. But if not, a safe pick is always like Bloodthirster and maybe some tanky items like a Sterex Gauge or a Titan, sorry. Titan is probably a little bit better because it gives everything. Where is Titans? Right? There's many different ways to itemize him, but typically you're going to itemize him as such. Varus, a lot of times you'll just put utility on just to make sure. Or you can like rearrange your items if you have like a lot of different units to put, but you'll put like anti-heal and sundering on him, and then your tank items on your Nasus. Now we're talking about Sugarcraft. Sugarcraft isn't the greatest comp to play around. It's pretty flexible. Usually you have 1 Sugarcraft emblem and then you're playing around 6 Sugarcraft. It's really relying on cash outs. I think I recently made a video on Sugarcraft and I talked about it a lot in the current patch. You can check that out if you want to see it a little bit better. But like I was saying in that video, if you're playing around Jinx carry, then you can play Olaf to get the Hunter synergy. But typically your board's going to look like this. And you're going to have Fiora with items and Gwen with items. And you're going to have to go for Gwen 2 as your main stabilization point. And then eventually you're just going to stay on level 8. Until you hit the rest of your board, and then you're going to go for 3-star Rumble. If you can, 3-star Jinx if she has items, or if you have items for Bard, 3-star Bard, right? Some sort of rendition of those. Finally, this is a very flexible board, which is a Witchcraft board that is enabled by a spatula. So you can either play Witchcraft Rise, and then you're playing around Zoe, or you can play Witchcraft Karma, and then you play with Cassiopeia. So for example, I'm just going to show the Witchcraft. If you're playing the Karma, it's similar to other Karma boards. You just play around Preservers and Shapeshifters and Warriors, the same way that you always play Karma. So to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm just going to talk about Rise here. So with Rise, you can play a board that looks like this and play around 6 Witchcraft. If you don't have a Witchcraft emblem, this board is very, very fucking weak. So you should always only play it if you have a Witchcraft emblem. And even with a Witchcraft emblem, I think this board is very weak. I'm a hater for sure. But of course, to each their own. But basically, you can play around this Rise. And then you can play Tarek and you get in a free portal. So it actually synergizes really, really well. It just doesn't have as much damage as some of the other boards. So it might be a little bit better in a later patch. The thing about Witchcraft Emblem is that it's very, very flexible. If you're unsure based on the rest of your lobby, if you can play Karma or if you can play Rise, Rise is really good with anti-heal. Just because the same way Karma is. So a lot of times you can basically just start your game by making your utility items and then swap between the Rise and the Karma. Archangels isn't necessarily good on Karma, but you can delay making Archangels because if you get another tier, you make blue buff. If you don't get a tier, then you'll just make Shojin. And the reason these 2 units work really well with Witchcraft is because Witchcraft, the curses will spread to the back line. So the way that Witchcraft works is like they curse an enemy based on when they hit with an ability. So if you give it to Rise and Karma, then you're gonna apply the Witchcraft effect to the back line, which can sometimes just instantly kill them. Especially if you're 8 Witchcraft, it works out really well because imagine you just turn the backline unit into a frog. It's like GG, the game's over. So typically you're playing around Rise or Callista. Now back to the little guide here. One thing I did want to say before we end the video is just utility items. So this is something you might want to keep note of. Whenever you're slamming items, you always want to make sure that you're keeping utility items in your mind. For example, like slamming items that use bows. Bows are really, really important because a bow can make shred, a bow can make sundering, and a bow can make anti-heal. So when you're making something like a Gwinsu, a Gwinsu slam is sometimes risky, especially if there's not like a really dominant unit that can use it. Obviously, you need to make a Gwinsu for Callista, because the unit fucking sucks without Gwinsu. But you shouldn't make a Gwinsu for like random other units a lot of the time, because you're better off saving the bow to make a red buff, a Last Whisper, or a Shiv. Depending on the situation, right? The same with like belts, right? Sometimes you'll see people make Warmogs really early, or you'll see people make Rabadons really early. You want to make sure that you keep a belt because a belt can be anti-heal, a belt can be sundering. There's many different options for some of these components. So when you see these components in particular, you should always double check is this an item that is really, really strong? Am I not pivoting off of this board, and is this essential for me, right? Obviously, if you're playing around Callista and you have a Callista, you're making Guinsoo. Who gives a fuck about anti-heal? Who gives a fuck about sundering? It's like, if you don't have a Guinsoo on Callista, you're not going to win the game. It's not worth it. You need a Guinsoo on Callista, right? But if you're playing some other board, like if you're playing Karma and you're meandering a bit, you know, you have to think to yourself, right? Do I make red buff? But if I have items for it, maybe I can make Morello and then I can make Shiv, right? Or I can make, you know, red buff and then something else, right? Always keep in mind utility items. They matter a lot more, especially when you're playing around 4 costs. A lot of times when you're making flexible options, a lot of times, like for example, it's not really relevant in the current patch because I talked about it while I was doing the video. A little bit, like not implicitly, but a lot of these comps that I'm showing you, there's like 1 or 2 comps that are like, you gotta play this and you kind of have to commit really early if you're playing it, like Callista and Varus. A lot of the other comps, they all require a spat to be very, very strong and to keep up with a lot of the boards, in my opinion. Obviously, you can high roll, and if you hit a bunch of upgrades, you'll be strong, and you go 9 and you get a bunch of legendaries, but that's not what the point of this guide is. The point of this guide is like, what's your angle for 4 costs? You can't just say at the start of the game, I'm gonna hit everything when I roll down level 8. You have to have a game plan. So the game plan a lot of times is that the spats are really strong, but without a spat, these comps fall apart. Like Rise is very hard to play without a spatula these days. There are variations of Rise boards that you can play. For example, okay, sorry for the jump cut, my VOD broke, but basically what I was trying to say is that there's some boards you can play around that you can kind of work around even without a spatula. For example, like 6 Scholar Rise is very, very strong, and it's game winning in a lot of cases, but that's another comp that's locked behind a spat, so I didn't want to show all these spat comps. But like for example, this is a Bastion Rise setup that's often very, very strong. The problem with Bastion Rise that makes it a little bit more difficult to play around is just because like it loses really hard in the current meta to things like Callista and things like Varus especially. So you can still play around these boards, obviously, especially if you're contested on Callista and you have a Guinsoo. You can definitely play like Rise with a Guinsoo and like play around this board instead. And it's a good pivot angle to try and salvage placements. But for the sake of the guide, I just want to show you guys stronger comps with the current patch. And then obviously, because it's like a starter kit of like how to play around 4 costs in general, I didn't want to make too much of an emphasis on, hey, here's a tier list of all the 4 cost comps, which is a separate video in itself, which might come at a later point if you guys really want to see it or you really want to show it. But it's an example of a comp, another comp that doesn't use a spat that most people know about because it's was pretty prevalent in previous metas. And the last thing I just want to say is just like utility items. This is a slide for if you're playing very generic boards and not sure exactly what you want to play. A lot of times a good starting point is to start with utility items, making anti-heal, sundering, and shred. If you look like you have AP items, like let's say you get dropped a bunch of tears and a bunch of rods, you might want to make a shred item and just play towards one of the AP lines and hope that you stumble across the units and the items later. And that's kind of like the idea or the crux behind playing flexibly. A lot of the comps feel like they're locked behind spats. I would suggest, if you want to climb this patch, I would primarily build towards Callista, Rakan, or Varus. And if those comps are very contested in your lobbies, then you can start looking for other options. Because an uncontested comp, if you hit everything and everybody's playing Varus and they don't hit, you're definitely going to beat the Varus player. Even the Callista player you can beat if you have an upgraded board with everything on it, right? But typically it's like Callista, Varus, then you look for plan B. If you have a bunch of AP items, it's usually a Karma variation. It's usually 4 warrior Karma or 2 warrior Karma with preservers, depending on what you hit. And if you find a spatula along the way, then you can pivot into one of these spatula comps that I showed. If you're making general items, this is the starting point. Make sure to always consider making these items whenever you see these components, right? For example, a belt that makes a Morello, or a bow that can make all of anti-heal, sundering, and shredding. You don't want to use these items for no reason and then pivot around them later. You want to keep hold of these items and make a decision around them, and then play flexibly around anti-heal, sundering, and shredding, because that's very important. Anyways, thank you for watching the video. That concludes the video. And hopefully this was a useful guide. I'm going to be working on a reroll guide, which should be out hopefully tomorrow or the day after. So we will see. But yeah, and then if you want to learn how to play any particular comp, you can let me know in the comments which one you want to know about, and I'll try my best to play it myself. I play all the comps that I can. I play as flexibly as I can. Normally, that's just the type of player that I am. So my VOD reviews are on my channel, and you can either look at those or ask about something and I'll try it out. You know what I mean? Or give my opinion on, why I'm not trying it out. But totally cool, and thank you for watching, and hopefully you have a great day.